Welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. Hey, you guys, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. I am so super duper, like out of my mind in a good way. Excited to share this episode with all of you. So if you saw the title of my show, you know that I am speaking with the one and only Marianne Williamson. And I just assume that people who know me know who she is. But for those of you who don't, for the listeners who don't, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my beautiful guest. So for more than 4 decades, Marianne Williamson has been a leader of spiritually progressive circles. She's the author of 16 books, 4 of which have been the #1 New York Times bestsellers, which is just crazy. It's just crazy. And actually, one of the things we're going to be talking about on the episode today is her latest book that I'm holding up right here. It is called The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love. It's such a beautiful and powerful and helpful and practical book. Like you can apply stuff in here right away to your life. And it's really fantastic. If you've read her mega huge bestseller, A Return to Love, I am sure at some point you have heard the quote that begins, the little piece of the prose that begins, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond all measure." This little, some people call it a poem. It's not really a poem, but this section, this prose from A Return to Love, is considered an anthem for a contemporary generation of seekers. Her other bestsellers have included A Woman's Worth, The Law of Divine Compensation, Tears to Triumph, The Gift of Change, and now this new sucker, this new one, is doing really fantastic as well, The Mystic Jesus. So with her books and online classes, she has literally taught millions of people the universal spiritual principles at the heart of miracle-minded thinking. And you guys, who doesn't need a little bit more of miracle-minded thinking, right? She founded Project Angel Food, which is a nonprofit organization. It has delivered more than 18 million meals to ill and dying homebound patients in the Los Angeles area since 1989. The group was originally created to help people suffering from the ravages of HIV and AIDS. She's also worked throughout her career on poverty and anti-hunger and racial reconciliation issues. And this is all true, and I know because I was there. In 2004, she co-founded the Peace Alliance and supported the creation of the United States, the U.S. Department of Peace. So that's like her formal bio. There's 1,000 more things I could say about her. I'm sure many of you, this is the old school version. I'm holding up A Return to Love, but many of you have read this book as well. And I know it has been life-changing for you. So in this conversation, it's a long conversation. It's like 2 hours and it's personal. And we talk all about like how we first met. We share some inside stories about us like living together, being together, her as my spiritual godmother, my teacher, my mentor, and my beloved friend. And we also talk about her new book, and we talk a little bit about spirituality and politics and just so many incredible conversations and topics that we cover. So in this conversation, I should say. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. And I think you might see Marianne in a way that you have maybe not seen her before on other podcasts and other interviews. There's something really beautiful about talking to an old friend or somebody that you feel safe with or have known for a really long time. So I definitely think there's going to be some amazing takeaways from this. I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I did, and that you can feel all the love that is flowing back and forth between us and also out to all of you. So thank you, dear listeners, and buckle up, and enjoy the ride. Thanks so much. Hey, you guys, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. I can barely contain my excitement. I'm so happy whenever I get to talk to Marianne Williamson, and I really often feel like she doesn't even need an introduction. So the world kind of talks about her as Marianne Williamson, and I feel like, I mean, I've known you since I was in my 20s. So it's been a wicked long time, like over 30 years. And so I've kind of known you since, I want to say 1992 is when I discovered you from, look at how old this sucker is. It is like brown on the edges. I have had this book. This is the book. Did I ever tell you the story of this book and how I
No,
first got to
I
know who you were?
I definitely remember the time getting to know you, and we were on a stage and you were in those
Overall.
overalls you used to wear all the time. I do remember the first day we met, but no, I don't know the story of how you found the book.
Okay. So I had like graduated from BU, from Boston University. My roommate at the time went to Emerson College and she had an internship at CBS. And so she went on to become an Emmy award winning casting director for The Young and the Restless and these different show stuff. But when she was first moving out to LA, she was like, she's like, will you come with me? And I was like, okay. I had like $1,200 in my pocket and is it like a Thomas guide, the thing that used to tell you where all the streets were? Like that's all I had. So for the first I would say I was there for about 8 years. And for the first 6 years or so, 6.5 years, I had no car, no transportation. I was taking the bus everywhere. So one of my saving graces my whole life has always been my love of books, my love of reading. That is something that my mother passed down to me. So where I would seek comfort is going into bookstores. And so one day I went into the bookstore. It was Crown Books in Burbank on Sepulveda. I'll never forget. And I walked in. I ended up working at that bookstore eventually. I spent so much time there. They offered me a job. But I'll never forget going into the bookstore. And at that time, and I was really into fitness and lifting weights. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go into the health section. And as I was walking through I remember it so vividly, walking straight back into where the health section was, the magazines, the bodybuilding magazines, all that stuff. And I literally heard a voice in my head say, you should go to the self-help section because you could use some help. And I thought, like, what is happening? But I listened. For whatever reason, I said, okay. And I was walking down the aisle and I'm looking at everything. And this is back in the day, like 92. This is like Deepak and like all the self-help, everything's blowing up. There's all these books, and I'm just looking a little overwhelmed. And there's nobody else in the aisle with me. And all of a sudden, literally, this book goes like this. And like,
Really?
I swear to God, the book fell off the shelf, literally. I look down. I always tell this story, and I see this face looking back at me. And this is me. This is literally what I said. Who's this broad? And so I pick it up and I read it, and I'm like, A Return to Love, Reflections on the Principles of A Course in Miracles. And I had no idea what it was. I was raised a Catholic. I had no idea what this was. And I thought to myself, Jesus, I could use a miracle.
Oh,
And I sat down on the floor and I opened up this book. This is before there were chairs in bookstores. And I sat on the floor and I opened this book. And I say two things. I say, number one, I had never, ever heard anybody talk about God the way that you talked about God. And I found it incredibly intriguing and attractive and really magnetizing. And I also got really mad because it was the first time anybody had ever told me that like I kind of had a say in my own suffering, that like I had a choice in how I interpreted the events that had happened in my life. And it was from that point forward that I was like, as soon as I get a car, one of the first things I'm going to do is go to one of your lectures because you were lecturing at the time every week in LA. And I went to your lectures, and I just remember, I mean, I do an impression of you out of love. Like I'm like we see in the middle of our mind a beautiful ball of golden light. We watch as this light grows larger and larger. So I always do this like little thing. But so many things that you did on stage way back in the day, like it deeply gets in my subconscious. And so even now, whenever I have an event or a retreat or a yoga class, I tell everybody, turn to the people to your left and your right and front and behind and introduce yourself. Like that's something I got from you. And I always give you credit and stuff. But from that point, then I started going to your special events. And when I first met you, where I met you, I will never forget it. It was at Michael Beckwith's Agape, and you were doing a workshop on relationships. And I had the overalls on, I'll never forget. And I stood up and I had every intention. I was dating a magician at the time. I worked at a place called Wizards up at Universal City Walk, and I was dating a magician, and it just was not going well. It was not magic. I mean, we went back and forth, and I got up, and I thought I was going to ask a question about relationships. And as soon as I got to the mic, I literally say, I feel like my mother like took over my body, and she made me ask you the question, and I said, I'm not so sure, like, I get this whole forgiveness thing. And you said, like, well, tell me more. And I told you a little bit about my mother being murdered and being killed. And I said to you, my mother has started coming to me in my dreams. And she said to me, I've forgiven him. Now it's your turn. And I said, and I don't know how to do that. And so that's when you brought me up on stage. And that was one of the most, I'm getting goosebumps even retelling the story, but I will never, ever, 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 ever forget that experience. And when you hugged me, the things you said in my ear, the thing you said to the crowd, it was one of the most life-changing experiences of my life. And I mean, I don't want to, I could go on and on, but I write about it in my book. P.S. is a whole chapter on you.
Well, it's so fascinating what you're saying about your mom because I didn't remember that she had come to you in a dream and had said that. So after that, did she stop coming in the dreams or?
No, she still comes to me in my dreams. But the dreams now are almost all a little more stressful, meaning the number one theme in my dreams is that other people in my family, that somehow she's still alive, and other people in my family knew she's been alive this whole time, but never told me. And so now I will find out, and then I go looking for her. And then I find her and I say, where have you been? Why? I said, why have you been gone for so long? Like I missed you so much. And it's very intense. My dreams about my mother are never just like, oh yeah.
So
This-
does
oh,
she, in the dream, does she respond to that question?
um, what normally happens is I'm so emotional that I wake myself up. But there was one dream, and I write about it in the book, where I was so mad at everybody, and I found her. I was so mad. We were all playing cards around a table, and people started dropping hints. And I finally said, like, "What aren't you guys telling me?" They told me she was alive. They told me where she lived. She lived right down the street from me. And I ran down the street, like busted in the front door of her house. And we were in this long, skinny hallway. We were both wearing like parkas, like snow jackets and stuff like that. And I grabbed her and she basically just hugged me and she leaned against the wall and we both slid down the wall onto the floor. And she basically said to me something like, I've never left you. And then she basically says, like basically like me and God have always been here for you. And so it's always like really big. But this whole thing I've always said about you that I really believe that that she was instrumental in me discovering you. And I always say two of the most impactful things in my life have been losing my mother and finding Marianne Williamson. You're muted.
How old would your mother be today?
So she was born in 47, so she'd be like,
5 years older than me. She'd be like 77 years old now.
yeah. Yeah, she was 33. She was the same age as Jesus when she died. And she was 33. And I just think like I never thought I would outlive her. Like it's always a very strange thing when you outlive your parent. And then you do. And then the older I get, the more I just have so much compassion for that young woman and how young she was, how young she was. Uh, and I wish I could have seen who she would have become. I have no doubt that she sees what I'm up to, my shenanigans, but I wish I could have seen the actualization of her dreams. I think that would have been really, really cool. Although I have said, because I was so attached to her, the pull of my mother's gravity was so strong. Like talk about the light of the world. When my mother walked into a room, it was like, and I don't know if I ever would have left Massachusetts. Like, I don't know if I ever would have went off to college or moved to LA or did any of those things that allowed me. I often say this, and I mean it with deep reverence and respect for her and her life and her suffering and what she went through. But I don't know that I would be the same person if she had lived.
Yeah, I've heard you say that before. And it's all part of the larger mystery, isn't it? Well, God's answer to death is always some greater form of life. And you have lived out an aspect of her life that she wasn't able to live out on this earth. You've lived it out for her. And you're also old enough now to have a stronger awareness that the time between when that horrible thing happened and now
Mm.
is probably greater than the time between now and when you'll see her again.
It's so true, right?
Hmm.
I mean, I take great comfort. I take great comfort in that, you know. I think as, you know, in this illusion that we're all in the dream in yoga, we call it the Maya, the illusion, Course in Miracles, the dream. You know, I feel like there's a part of me that's already reunited. Like I feel like that I'm just still acting out whatever's left on this, you know, as a writer, you know, as a fellow writer, I'm like
Well,
the script, the acting, the directing, you know. And I don't know if it was you. I don't know who said it. But I kind of think about this all the time that sometimes we can look at our life as if we're sitting in the audience with Jesus.
oh, that's a good one.
We're sitting in the audience with Jesus watching the movie. Was it you? It sounds like your sense of
No,
humor.
no.
And
I
he
agree with it. I think it sounds cool, but no,
and you
I
lean
didn't
over,
say that one.
yeah, and you basically lean over to him and you ask, is this a tragedy or a comedy?
Oh, that's great. I don't know who said it, but kudos to them. Well,
Yeah,
also, I think from a Course in Miracles perspective and everything that we know, she hasn't ever left you.
yeah, that's
Life is one, and the veil between this life and the life on the other side is
so thin.
thinner and thinner the more you know. And of course, she said that to you in a dream. I never left you. She's been here the entire time. And
Yes.
also, it makes you wonder, I think about this with my parents. I think about it with my sister. Any people that we know who have passed, I wonder what they're doing over there.
You know, I was lucky enough to meet your mom. She came to Egypt with us on that trip.
Yeah, and I have pictures, Karen, that I find every once in a while. India, she was such a little girl then. She now is not only the mother of a little girl, but pregnant with a second little girl.
I know it's incredible when I think
Yeah,
to that and
yeah.
how fascinating it was to, you know, just like you're a famous person, like you know, I think you're really well known. You've run for president twice. You have 16 books, four of which became New York Times #1 bestseller. I mean, the shit you've accomplished in this lifetime is like so remarkable. I hope you pause. I hope you do pause once in a while and realize how remarkable, like what a I don't know. I often wonder, like, maybe your ancestors knew all along, like that the world was like ready for you, and then you got sent here or whatever. But you have accomplished some incredible things. And but I
Thank you,
remember
Karen.
it's true. Meeting your mom and like how do I explain this? It was like almost like just being not so much a fly on the wall, but I was so fascinated with the dynamic of you two because I am just fascinated by the
Mothers and
relationships
daughter.
between mothers and daughters, anyways. But I have a picture of you. I think I actually even sent it to you. And you're both sitting, we were on, I think this is when we were going down the Nile on the cruise and we're on the ship. And there's a picture of you, and you have a thing, like I said, because I've been watching you for 35 years, the way you do this thing with your chin and your finger. And your mother was like sitting, and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm seeing the DNA like right here. It was so
Wow.
incredible.
Wow.
Yeah,
I
I
would
love
like
that.
to, I do, when she used to come to visit when I was giving lectures in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
and all of these, particularly all these gay men, young men who were at my lectures, and they would go up to her, oh, Mrs. Williamson, your daughter this, your daughter that, and your daughter has been so wonderful to me. And this is what my mother would always say. She was very difficult to raise.
Yes. Yes.
I
I
think I
thought,
was very difficult to raise. I remember saying to my mother once when I was a young woman, my sister married and she had a home and she had children and she had a good marriage and it all worked. And I was like, kind of always struggling. And I said to my mother at one point, this was before my career started, I said, Mommy, why don't you just admit it? You like Jane. You like Jane. And you don't like me the way you like Jane. Why don't you just admit it? And her response to me It was so amazing, she said, because I expected that she would say, that's just not true. That's not what she said. She said, for the last 10 years, your sister has given me nothing but joy. And you have given me nothing but pain or anxiety or whatever she said. And I thought to myself, well,
She has a
I mean,
point.
that's reasonable. I can't really complain about that. So I thought that was, she at that point wanted a different kind of daughter, and I wanted a different kind of mother.
Sure.
Once I figured that out and saw the mirroring that was happening. And I didn't have the tragic end to my mother's life that you had, but like you, even though my mother lived to be a very old woman, I wish I had another 5 minutes with her.
Don't we?
I remember reading an interview with Stella McCartney. Her mother was Linda.
Mm-hmm.
I read an interview in a magazine, and they said, if you could have anything, what would you want? And she said, 5 more minutes with my
Oh
mother.
my God, isn't that the truth? It makes me verklempt.
But we're going to have eternity with them.
I know. I know. It's
And we do have
incredible.
eternity with them. I mean, they're here.
We get, I think of it jokingly. I say we're a little greedy, right? It's like, it's the physical longing. It's like whether it's their smell, the sound of their voice, their laughter, whatever the thing is. And I think for me, what it was is that my mother was highly attuned to my sensitivity. Like she knew what a sensitive kid I was. And I really feel like my mother deeply saw me, deeply heard me. And she was not a perfect mother by any stretch of the imagination, but she saw me, she heard me, and I belonged to her. I knew that I had a place of belonging, and so much of what my life's journey, my spiritual journey has been was, and this is what my memoir is about, my book is about that I'm still writing, is about the to realize that I have always belonged and that I have belonged to something greater than even my mother. And do you want to say something?
Well, I can't remember. How old were you when she
12,
died?
12. So it was at precipice, right? And I was such a
Mhm.
tomboy. Like I cried when I got my period. I cried when I had to start wearing a bra. Like I just was like such a little like, I was tough. I looked like a boy till I was 13, really. Like I had short hair. I would go into a woman's bathroom, they'd kick me out. They thought I was like I was like I looked like a little boy. And
So who ushered you through all that?
me.
No, but you went to live what with relatives?
Oh, yeah. So my mother, this is interesting. Like about a week or so before she died, I got my first period. And she had given me my sex talk. Like I got the sex talk when I was like 6 because I had stepsisters and I had an older sister. She's only a year and a half older than me. But we used to have this book at my house called How Babies Were Made. And I found it. And I asked some questions, or I stumbled upon, I think she was giving she's my stepsister. I call her my sister, Kathy. She was getting the sex talk. And I think I walked in the room. My mother's like, yeah, here, sit down. So she talked to us about those things. So she taught me about menstruation and your period. And I'll never forget, I tell this story that like about a week before she was killed, she was in her bedroom on her bed on the phone talking to one of her girlfriends. And I was walking by into the kitchen to get a snack. And I overheard her, like she started telling her that I got my period. And I was horrified. I was so mad. And I was like, you traitor. How could you tell her? Like, how could you tell her? And she just like laughed, not in a mean way. She just kind of laughed at my drama. And then she explained, she's like, yeah, the pads are in the bathroom, whatever. Like, so she explained it to me. But like, I taught myself how to use a tampon. I went and bought them for the first time. Like, those things, like becoming a woman, like, I figured all that out basically on my own because nobody in my family talked about anything. So my biological father's brother, my uncle, and his wife were the ones to take us in. So I lived with them for 4.5 years after my mother died. And then at 17, I went off to college and I was on my own from 17 on. So it was like a journey. Like that's why I say it's no joke when I say like I found you, and there were a couple of women throughout over time, like Miss Lefebvre, she was my high school teacher, she was my cheerleading coach, and she was my boyfriend's mother. And Miss saved me. And then it was like a series of this. So it was like Miss, and then I found you, and then you introduced me to Daphne, and I found Daphne, and she played a role like that.
Are you in touch with Daphne?
Once in a blue moon, but it's probably been about 3 years, maybe a little more, 4 years. But once in a blue moon, because she used to get my newsletter and she would read it and she'd send me a little love note. But as far as I know, she's still alive and she's still in Santa Barbara, as far as I know. She moved for a while, but then I think she moved back.
She
So,
was in Hawaii, yeah. I
yeah.
was thinking about her recently. I'd love to be in touch with her. I haven't talked to her in many years, a lot longer than 3 years, and I would just love to.
Yeah, she was
I think of her
incredible.
very fondly, and a great writer.
She is a great writer, and she was one of the first people to really start to talk to me about like Pat's work, IFS, internal family systems, and really honoring the younger versions of myself and giving them a voice and listening to what I needed. And I just think back to all of you, but I'm laughing. One of the things I had this little, it's not really a surprise, but I was laughing because I'm like, I wanted to show you this. This is the first, with my own money, the very first thing after your book that I bought. I bought this at one of your lectures, and it was like probably, let me see, look at this. The old cassette tapes.
Wow.
I have like your whole series. Like this is when they used to come in like these old plastic things. And look at these. I bought every single one of them. This was before I think I could get to your I was like I would buy all your audio cassettes and I would listen to them in my little Walkman. I would like listen to all of your cassettes and I'd be like, all right, what does Marianne have to say on women playing big? What did she have to say about creativity and self-confidence? But like you were like you were like my spiritual mother, my spiritual godmother. And you have just played such a huge role in my life. But enough about me. I could talk about us all day long. I want to talk about uh like the role that you have played, I think, in the greater world, in the work that you've done. I mean, your books, of course. I mean, A Return to Love is stratified. But what I want to really talk about is your new one. I am so happy that you wrote a book about Jesus.
Oh, thank you.
I am so excited. So, for those of you who are not watching the episode, but you're listening, I'm holding up Marianne's latest book, her 16th book. It's called The Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love. And I'm just going to read a little something from the back, and then maybe we can dive into this. You say, the mystic Jesus is a deeper alignment of heart and mind, redirecting human intelligence and reminding us of who we are. He was a historical figure, of course, but he is ahistorical as well. He was present as a man on the earth 2,000 years ago, and he is present as a spirit within our psyches even now. Oh, I love this. He is a name for the unalterable love. Don't we all need some unalterable love right now? He is a name for the unalterable love that all of us share, out of which we were created and through which all of us are one. I think right now in the world, with the way everything is kind of going, I don't think a lot of people feel as if we are one. This idea of perfect oneness in A Course in Miracles, right? And we have very much bought into the tiny mad idea of separation. So when we talk about Jesus in this way, that he is the unalterable love through which all of us are one. I mean, how do you think like this book in particular, but this idea of Jesus as being this figure who in some ways, if we pay attention, can guide us into how we can have that experience of our perfect oneness. You want to say a little bit more about that?
Well, to the traditional Christian, the line, there is only one begotten Son, means Jesus. From the metaphysical or mystical, miracle-minded perspective, there's only one of us here. That's the meaning of there is only one begotten Son, that the Son of God is one creation. The image I often use is of the wheels, right? And the spokes of the wheel. So we are used to identifying the various spokes by their position on the rim of the wheel. But if you take each spoke all the way to its source point, it's one single source point. And the Course in Miracles, much like that. It's also similar to the way Carl Jung said, if you go deep enough into your mind and deep enough into mine, there are mental images we all share, what he called archetypes.
Mm.
The Christ mind, the one begotten Son, takes it one step further. That if you go deep enough into your mind and deep enough into mine, we share the same mind. So we are one on the realm of spirit. So on the realm of the material, clearly you're over there and I'm over here.
Mm-hmm.
On the realm of spirit, there's no place where I stop and you start. So we perceive with the body's senses, and thus we receive a world of disunity and separation and disharmony and conflict and all of the things that can arise so easily from that filter. But the heart knows a truth that is truer.
Mm-hmm.
What the Course in Miracles says is a world beyond this one, and that we can know it even when we can't see it. And when we know it, it's much like when a plane is flying through clouds. All it is hot air. But if you were only basing your perception on your physical eyes, you'd think, well, if the plane hits the cloud, it's going to crash. But the pilot knows. The pilot knows there's a horizon. The pilot knows that it's just air that I'm going to just flow through, right? Fly through. So faith is knowing, even though my physical senses perceive the Maya, the illusion, just knowing it is Maya, that it is illusion, just knowing, be still and know. In that moment, what the Course calls a holy instant, if you'll just take that moment of knowing that I am dwelling within this realm of the insanity. I love that famous line, Emily Dickinson, I dwell in possibility.
Yeah.
You can choose, no matter what your worldly circumstances, what world you want to dwell in. The world we wish to dwell in is one in which all of us are loving beings and we just want to love and be loved. And we're so confused living in this earth, and it's so
Oh.
complicated here. And there's so much evidence of the separation. And all of us, there are these places where we just want to be loved, but we don't know how to love in that moment and get our needs met. So we all turn into jerks sometimes. Just know that and be willing.
Yeah.
And that's what the Course in Miracles says is forgiveness, that I am willing to extend my perceptions beyond what the physical senses provide. Now, you and I have loved each other for a long time. So I know in my experience of you, I don't ever get anything but kindness and appreciation. So it's easy for me to soften. It's easy for me to feel safe. It's easy for me to love back. But we meet people on our path with whom it is not necessarily that easy. Obviously, you've had an experience in your life which is extreme, deeply extreme, where how can I possibly see beyond the guilt of this person? And that's what's so profound about your mother saying, I've forgiven him, it's your turn now. Now, we're not, and I know you're not, and we're not even from a theological perspective minimizing the human experience. But it is to say that there's a truth of eternal innocence that lies beyond this world as we experience it. And enlightenment, the Course says, is a shift in self-perception from body
Mm.
identification to spirit identification. One of the things you said a few minutes ago was that when you first read A Return to Love, it was the first time you had been exposed to the idea that you were responsible. The idea is that the circumstances are what the circumstances are. And in your case, obviously, terrible.
Mm.
And that someone is saying, but Viktor Frankl, this was a very,
Yes.
powerful statement, that no matter what, you were responsible for who you choose to be in the space of what's happened. You were responsible for what you choose to think in the space of what happens. And I think that's really important right now in this country and in this world. Because if we see ourselves only as victims, and we see whether it's Musk or Trump or whomever or left or depending your some people's politics, or they see the people on the left are the problem. Some people see the people on
Right.
the right are the problem. If we stay there, that is what has created this experience of the disunited states. None of us can feel happy in that place. None of us can feel peaceful in that place. So this is a real inflection point. This is a real choice point. Am I willing to see beyond the illusion of our separation? Now, that doesn't mean we're going to agree with each other. We don't have to agree with each other. It doesn't even mean we don't work passionately to block behavior that we think is really wrong. I mean, in politics and society, you set boundaries, just like you do as an individual. Love sometimes says no. Love
Yes.
sometimes is absolutely clear that that is not up to my standards, right?
Yes.
And
100%.
that's okay, but we can still keep our hearts open. And in both personal relationships as well as collective relationships, keeping our hearts open, knowing there's a larger context, even when it's time to set boundaries or whatever form of saying no is appropriate, will make all the difference. And then what that does, the Course in Miracles says, is that it transforms the realm of the illusion. And the realm of the illusion will become a place in which fear turns into love and disunity turns into unity. And I think any thinking person knows that we need that now. Just like when you said, when you saw the book and went, well, I need a miracle. You know, Karen, I had an interesting experience about a week ago. I was out to dinner with a couple friends of mine, and the woman is a wonderful woman, but I've heard her talk about religion in pretty dismissive ways. I know she's not one of us spiritually and all that kind of stuff. And we were talking about the political situation in the United States today. And she's very, very astute, and that's her field as well. And I said, well, I believe in miracles. And she said very seriously, well, it will take a miracle now. And I thought, glory, hallelujah, God works in mysterious ways. Because I never thought I'd hear that from her. And I thought, you know, this is forcing a lot of people to the very painful at first realization that, as they say in AA, your best thinking got you here. And this is unmanageable. You can't fix this. All the institutions you thought were going to fix this, all the laws you thought were going to fix this, all the things. Well, guess what?
Here we are.
On the material plane, other forces have it very locked up. So, time for a miracle.
I love that we're talking about this because I cannot tell you how painful it is. You know, when you know a person and then you see online, right? So like you'll do a post about, yeah, you know, it's not abuse, they're the abuse. Like whatever what your thoughts, because you have been like almost like daily. Sometimes I don't even, maybe twice a day, unless I'm making it up in my head. But you've been doing a lot on your Substack, and you guys go check out our Substack. All the links to all the ways to interact with Marianne and do classes and all those things I'll post. But you post a lot of things. And there's this thing about spiritual people that I'm just going to be not even going to say, excuse my language, because everybody knows I got a potty mouth, but like it drives me fucking nuts when they just expect us all. There's look, Course in Miracles people, I love you. And there's this thing that a lot of Course in Miracles students do, which is they think we're just supposed to pretend like nothing is happening and that we're not supposed, like it's so judgmental and unloving. And Marianne, how can you post such dark things? And I'm like, dark things? We're just saying what's going down. And one of the things I've always said is, even if it's not here in small R reality, it's not quote unquote real, it doesn't mean we don't do anything. I'm like, if you see a hungry kid, you give them a sandwich. Like you feed people, you love people, you do things. We don't stick our head in the sand and pretend like we're not supposed to do anything. And even Jesus is one of the things I love about Jesus as a mystic, and as some people have even said he's a heretic, right? Like he didn't, like you even said in your book, I think in one of the chapters, he doesn't ignore things. Can you talk about this a little bit? This confusion about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the Course in Miracles says, look at the crucifixion, but do not dwell on it. If you don't look at it, you're not transcending something, you're in denial. And the Course in Miracles talks about negative denial and positive denial. Negative denial is, oh, let's not look at it. And by the way, you say a lot of Course in Miracles students I'm sorry. I think a lot of people who say that have not actually read the whole thing.
Well, right.
Because
Right.
if you actually read the
Right.
Course in Miracles, it is not a book that denies within this illusion that some terrible things happen.
Thank you.
And the Course in Miracles says with the illusions are as powerful in their effects as is the truth. It's like you were just saying, when God saw a hungry person, when Jesus saw a hungry person, he wanted to feed them. When he saw a sick person, he wanted to heal them. So this is a strange um, faux spirituality somehow
Thank you.
that has come about in the last few decades, this idea that it's somehow spiritual to ignore the suffering of the world. And the truth of the matter is, there is no serious religious or spiritual tradition that I know of that gives anyone a pass on ignoring the suffering of other sentient beings. Jesus suffered on the cross. The Israelites were enslaved by Pharaoh. If you skip that and go directly to the promised land, if you skip the crucifixion and go directly to the resurrection, it's not resurrection. It's just posting or pasting a happy smiley face over the suffering of humanity. So I think you were in the class, was it yesterday that the woman brought
Hmm.
this up? And as I said at the time, Karen, what I respected was that she was very respectful.
Yes.
But a lot of those, and this is, of course, a great spiritual challenge for me. First of all, when I first read A Course in Miracles, not when I first read the course, but when I first wrote A Return to Love,
Yes.
Oprah Winfrey opened the door.
Yeah.
Oprah Winfrey opened the door. You would never have read Return to Love, I'm sure. I mean, it might have been, yes, it would have been published, but the way it was given international exposure. In politics, I've had no Oprah Winfrey. No one has said, we'll open the door. Here she is. Now, in my mind, what I have done in politics is no different than what I do in with Course in Miracles. What I've learned about myself is I'm a popularizer. That's what I do. I read this really thick book and I read it, and then I go to people and go, this is what it says, okay? This is what it says. And the people go, really? Yeah, this is what it's really saying. I feel I've done the same thing with politics. I look at it and I go, hey, everybody, this is what's really going down. So, to me, it's the same thing. And it's always about saying, see, they're not loving. That's the problem. They're not loving. That's a problem. But this is how we can change it. See, the same thing to me. But in it's interesting because no religious or spiritual, I mean, I got some mockery, of course, but there was no institutional resistance to my religious and spiritual career. I was, and still am when I'm in that space,
Oh, yes.
loved, appreciated, liked, and I can make a nice living.
Hmm.
Politics has been the exact opposite. In
Yes.
fact, when people say she's doing it to sell books,
I know.
the way to sell books in the spiritual world is to never mention politics. Let me tell you something, Karen. Some of my colleagues are even more left-wing than me, but they keep their mouths shut.
Look it. Don't think I don't notice who isn't speaking up and who isn't saying stuff. Like
Oh,
I'm
Wayne
very
Dyer, when I
aware.
think of Wayne,
I know.
so it's very challenging for me, as you can imagine. And now for me, in the course, it talks about God's plan of the teachers of God and how God knows how and Jesus, really, the Holy Spirit knows. He says, I know where your talents can best be used. So believe me, at this point, my blood, sweat, and tears. It has been devastating for me. Not only, I mean, you really, to wake up every morning. And they talk about you shouldn't online bully teenagers, but for whatever reason, online bullying me, go for it. I to every single morning wake up and lied about, smeared, humiliated. It's really attacked, judged, and then even by the spiritual crowd that's my spiritual lesson and challenge. Somebody said to me this morning something about some woman because I had gotten a text, did you know she's dating so and so? I went, oh, that's so wonderful. Somebody found love. That's always a good thing. And they said, but wasn't she really awful to you? I said, if I if I held on to every time someone in the political field has abandoned or neglected or betrayed or smeared, I would just be one angry, pathetic old woman. And that goes back to what you were saying. I'm at choice. I'm at choice. So, yes, it has been when people say, where's the love? Although I appreciate it, Karen, what you said about that, no, not what you said, but in that class, the fact that that woman was respectful in bringing it up.
Yes.
I had an experience over the last couple of days that has really meant a lot to me. Um, One of the things, well, definitely the thing that has been the hardest is how I have been caricatured as
Oh my
ditzy,
God.
woo-woo, not smart like they are. Um, all that has been, the insult is so strong, right? And then I also felt within the spiritual world, and this is why, and I've said this to you before, when I went to New Hampshire and you spoke to those crowds, and of course we know, had Reid Hoffman not given $2 million for the Biden write-in, et cetera, I was never given the chance within that world to get my sea legs. But to the extent to which I had any exposure, you were so out there and it meant so much to me. And so many, even in the spiritual world, in terms of higher consciousness community, our colleagues, some of whom have known me for years, wouldn't just make a video and say, I don't care about, I don't know about her politics. You may or may not agree, but look, I've known her for 35 years. That's not who she is. Everybody's so afraid. Well, they made her radioactive. So if I defend her, take up for her, or stand with her, that'll make me radioactive. That was so painful. I felt I was being sent. It's such archetypally, it was like witch burning, but all the people who were just silent while I was being led to the. So I had an experience just in the last week.
Mhm.
Somebody sent me a text. And I want to cover up those specifics to make sure to protect,
Sure.
you know. Somebody said that there had been a lecture and my name was mentioned in the lecture. And it was at a very fancy, prestigious place. And um, there was this lecturer, a woman who is a teacher at a very fancy, prestigious college. And it was about politics and love. And my friend had said, you're mentioned. But one of the things that I've seen so much of is that even if someone wanted to point out where they agreed with me, they would make sure that you knew. Not that I take her seriously or anything, right? Because the character of me is, well, you can't possibly take her seriously. I mean, she's such a joke, right? So then even if they go on to say something in agreement. So long story short, because I realize now all the things I should have spoken to, I should have said, stop right there. But at the time, somebody told me, I heard somebody talking about how there's actually a Japanese word for when it's like a fire hose, so much is
Yes.
coming at you.
Yes.
And so when you're actually running and going through all that, you're in a traumatized state.
Yes.
But now I'm not running, I have time. And I saw that and I thought, I'm going to write to this woman. And I looked her up on the internet and I wrote her, and I'm healed enough that I'm healed of any attack, I'm healed of any, I just said, this is what women are trained to do to one
Oh
another.
my God.
And I hope you will see that.
Yes.
Karen, I got the most beautiful letter back from her. The most beautiful letter. And first of all, I didn't even think I would necessarily hear back from her. Second, I would have thought that if I had heard back from her, maybe a condescending, well, that sort of new age apology, like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. I got such It was genuine atonement. It was amends. It said, "You're so right. I threw you under the bus." The way she apologized and the way she even made it could not have been more profound and elegant and beautiful, for which I'm so grateful. Um, so if we are open, and it's interesting, I can see how it works spiritually because I have not wanted to turn into a bitter old woman. because I have wanted to be forgiving, because there's been that kind of clearing within myself. I'm not saying I'm completely
Sure.
100%. I'm not a perfect person, but I've really worked at this because I knew, okay, you went through a brutal experience emotionally. Now you're a choice. Where are you going to go from this? You're going to become more open or more closed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I had not done that work, I think even if I'd written to her, it would have had a little bit of an attack back, but it didn't. And it opened the space. So healing is always happening. And I appreciate you acknowledging the phenomenon. And I do think, and tell me if you agree with this, it's been an extreme animus towards me in the culture among people who supposedly would call themselves feminists. There's been some strange, um, not just willingness, but eagerness. When, if you know anything about how the system works, the DNC, the very corrupt people at the top, saw me as a possible threat and to get rid of her. And then they de-amplify. I mean, even the women on The View would
Oh,
just
those.
take their talking points. When Sunny Hostin said how, completely mischaracterized my work with AIDS patients. But there's still some mystery to me, Karen. Um, One woman came up to me recently, a very a powerful political figure in a major American city, and I had spoken at some only for a couple of minutes at an interfaith something, and she came up to me almost like she was stricken, and she said, I want you to know, having heard you just now, I'm your fan." And she
This
said, I want to tell you that because before today, I was not your fan.
I
She
have.
said, I just want you to know that. I heard her, I took it in, and I said, I would only ask one thing. Next time you hear a woman mocked to me, she said, I know, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. So we're all learning.
Okay. Yeah. We are all learning. And and this is the thing that drives me absolutely mental. So I found it so fascinating. I think you may or may not remember the exact way that you said this, and I'm gonna try to like cover all the bases because you just said a lot. Um, when you came to New Hampshire in 2016 and I introduced you, and then you came out on stage and you said, you basically said, "Wow, New Hampshire, you're like the hotbed of activity right now. Like, how does this feel?" And you said, my spiritual journey actually began in New Hampshire. When I was 14 years
That's
old,
right.
I went
Phillips
to
Exeter
summer
Academy.
school and you said this. I was looking through the book brochure and there was a class called, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, Philosophical Interpretations of the Question of God. And you said,
Philosophical approaches to the question of God.
okay. And you said you shot out of your body with excitement. And ever since then, like that, ever since then, you have been, in your words, I wrote it down, in love with classes about religion, spirituality, and philosophy and stuff ever since. What that tells me is that since you were 14, first of all, okay, wait. Since you were 14, you have been a very serious thinker. There is nothing like, and this is, so here's something I want to ask you. What year did your dad die? Do you remember?
My father died in 1995.
Okay. Because I was trying to remember. At one point, I remember that I flew with you to Texas and we went to your mother's house. And I remember being at the table and just seeing you in like family time with like all of your relatives. And I just thought, this is fascinating because I think you have always been, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because it was only one time that I was in the room with all of you at the same time. But I had a deep sense of like, you're a little different, right? You were a little different than most of your family, etc. Okay. So here you are, this Jewish kid who ends up like discovering A Course in Miracles. is not bogged down by all of the language, and you didn't have to grapple with the terminology of like whatever. So when you met Jesus, I feel like, not that you didn't know about Jesus before that, but like you kind of met A Course in Miracles and these principles with like an open heart. What I'm trying to kind of put together is what is really frustrating is somebody who knows you personally and who like lived in your like lived I saw you every single day. I traveled with you. I watched you pack your clothes. I saw you raise your dog. Like I was around. And I would be amazed. I don't say this lightly. I don't, of Course in Miracles says reserve your awe for God, right? I don't have a lot of like awe for my fellow human beings. I have a lot of respect, I have reverence, I have excitement and curiosity. But I don't know if I've said to my sweetie so many times, you know what they don't get? How fucking smart she is. You used to speak these lectures. Talk about like you would just go out on stage. And yeah, you brought your book, in case you wanted to look up a particular thing, but no notes. Never. I was living with you. I don't know if you remember this. I was living with you when you first wrote, the first title of it was The Healing of America. And you were so studious and you really wanted to understand. And you were talking about reparations before it was even a thing. And you are, and I'm not saying that, listen, as you know, I don't blow smoke up anybody's ass. You might be one of the most intelligent women I have ever met. You are so, your capacity to recall information is brilliant, but even more so, your capacity to connect the dots and to take this information, to get intimate with it. Because one of my teachers she's like she would call herself maybe a medical intuitive. She's a healer. And her husband was, I think, a somatic therapist. But he once said to her, and then she said to me, information isn't what heals, intimacy heals.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And
Mm.
you have a way of taking a lot of information, getting very intimate with it, curating it, connecting the dots to how it applies to us, and then you deliver it to us in a very applicable way. I have always been blown away by your intelligence, by how you could just, and again, right, let's go back to the prayer from A Course in Miracles. I am here only to be truly helpful. I don't have to worry about what to say or what to do because he who sent me will tell me. You have always operated from that place. So it has been so incredibly frustrating to me when I would see you try to get a word in edgewise during a debate. Or you'd be on, even Bill Maher, God bless him, but he interrupts, right? Like so many people, they don't let you talk. And what I find fascinating is whenever, how do I say this? My problem with the media, my problem with shows like The View, my problem with like even TV shows and like all this stuff, they are trying to condense you, your brilliance, your point of view, your history, your whatever, into these tiny little boxes and these tiny little snippets and windows of time. And I'll never forget, I think it was the night you were on Trevor's show, and he let you talk. And I'll never forget him saying, "You don't sound so crazy when they actually let you talk, huh?" And I felt so vindicated. Like I was like, yes, like I was screaming at my TV. So this is what I think what part of the problem is in America and in how people create these caricatures of you is they don't do their homework. They don't take time to read your books. They don't take time to go and hear you speak at length because any person who has ever sat in a lecture hall with you either says like, well, they say many things, but it's either like, I don't get this because they are just not attuned to that, or they think, oh my God, like, oh my God. And I think that there's we do this. I think there's a lot of like eye rolling that happens around love. And it will
Mhm.
be our demise if we don't course correct that.
Well, also eye rolling if it's not, if it's a male
Oh my God.
or someone who's like a male minister, then it's, oh, Reverend, thank you, or whatever. Yeah. Or if a male says it. Um,
Do
you
you,
could take some quotes from Martin Luther King and just not tell somebody that it was him, and then those eye rolls might come. But if they know it's Martin Luther King, they can open to it, they can see it, and they can see the profundity.
can I interrupt you for a second? I don't know how long it's been since, and I don't know if you've ever gone back and seen this video of you. I don't know exactly where you were, but it was a conference and it was something like a collective of different like religious groups. And there were a bunch of women in the audience. And you started to talk about how, like, it was like, I think I'm like, she's channeling right now. Like, she is just like on fire right now. But you were basically saying how that they fear independent women because independent women raise independent children and independent thinkers, and how it's such a threat to them. Do you remember that conference? Do you remember?
Yeah, and it was fun. And I remember the movie that I got that from was there was a film called The Burning Times by the Canadian Film Board. And the concept was that passionate, free-thinking women raise passionate, free-thinking children. Passionate, free-thinking children become passionate, free-thinking adults. And passionate, free-thinking adults are very difficult to manipulate and almost impossible to control.
Yes. And I think that that sums up you. And I think people, it's easier to make fun of you because what do? We don't like, we put down, we make fun of, we other what we do not understand.
Yeah.
And in rather than doing our homework, and in rather than, like I said, you spend any amount of time with you, there is nothing like I always say it's not woo woo, it's true true. There is nothing like you have never been this like woo like I
Cut
don't think there's
velvet
any
under the, yeah,
I don't think there's
yeah, I
anything more
know.
serious than love. I don't think there's anything more serious and more powerful than love.
Mhm.
And if they don't, they, whoever, if people don't start to wake up to this, because we've tried, like you were just saying, we've tried the other stuff. You know, like as you always say, the people who drove us into the ditch are the ones trying to now tell us that they're the only ones who can get out of it. Please, please, we've tried your way and look where we've gotten.
That's right. And also, I think that those people who simply made a decision that I would not be heard, they felt that democracy was threatened, therefore they had to suppress democracy, that didn't want my voice in the mix. They came up with a caricature that I'm not a serious person because they knew how
You were,
serious I am. See, that's the interesting thing. Some of them might not have understood the seriousness because, as you said, they didn't read my books, they didn't come to hear
mm-hmm.
my lectures. But I think they did have a sense that I could attract an audience
Oh,
if I was heard. And instead of seeing that as, oh, great, well, then let's see if it might be something and let the American voters, the Democratic voters decide. It was like put the lid on it and make sure that it's not out there. Not because they thought I couldn't be successful, because of the level in which they thought that I might be. And it was undemocratic, and I think it contributed to the situation we're in now.
well, let me ask you this. You said somewhere, having taught universal spiritual themes as articulated in A Course in Miracles for over 40 years, this is pointing back to your book. You say none of those themes have been more fascinating to me than the role of Jesus in helping to enlighten the human race. So this is like a two-part question. So what do you think Jesus's role is right now in enlightening the human race? And what is I guess to simplify it, I'll just say, and what's your role right now? Like, where are you pointing right now? Like, where is your energy and your focus? I mean, I am in touch with you. I see, but for people who maybe don't know, who are curious, like, what's next, or where are you going next, or
Well,
whatever.
the first question was about Jesus, so let's
Yes.
take the Jesus part first. The Course in Miracles indicates he became, while on this earth, completely purified of all fear, so that only divine consciousness or love remained within his mind. That is the same thing as saying he became completely enlightened. It is the same thing as saying he became completely self-actualized. It's the same thing as saying he became one with the Holy Spirit. Having thus become one with the Holy Spirit, the Course says he is then authorized by God to help the rest of us, should we request it. If you don't request it, it would be a violation of your free will. But if you do request it, he said, I'll come into your thinking, I'll come into your mind, my mind shine, with your mind can shine away the ego. That has been his role, that will always be his role. Once God has created something, it's unalterable.
Mm.
In terms of me now, I'm like everyone. This is not a moment when any of us can figure out what to do, Karen.
Mhm.
This is a moment when humanity is at this incredible inflection point, in much in the way that you and I discussed before. The mind that can figure it out is already stymied here. So I think this is a moment, people say all the time about our political situation and so forth. What do we do? This isn't a moment for knowing what to do. This is a moment for deep receptivity, preparing your vessel, making yourself available. If you're going to build a big, tall building, you're going to have a deep hole in the ground. Right now, it's about trying to prepare ourselves and being very aware. I feel with the people I know, with the people I come into contact with, I sense that it's almost as though, not that the universe is different, it doesn't change, but I have a deeper awareness of the intentionality of the universe. The Course in Miracles says God has the answer to every problem the moment the problem occurs. We are democracy, and I do believe that American democracy has been and continues to be a great light upon the planet. It is wounded, it is compromised, it's definitely not in good shape.
Mm.
But I believe that God, once again, God has the answer to every problem the moment the problem occurs. It like works like a GPS. You take the wrong turn, and God knows we've made the wrong turn. The universe, the GPS recalibrates, and it calibrates through each and every one of us. So I'm in a state of not knowing. There's a certain level in which I'm sure you are too.
Mm.
I'm sure that's where everybody, I think consciousness right now, the highest space is, I
I
don't
don't
know,
know.
be an empty rice, like it says in the Eastern religions, be an
Right.
empty rice bowl, present an empty rice bowl to God. So the Western mind, Western materialism is, I got to figure it out, and then after I've figured it out, I'll let God know in case He's interested. Bill Thetford, one of the scribes of the Course, called the Course the Christian Vedanta. It's emptiness. Use me. Use my hands, use my feet. There's that beautiful part in the Course. Use my hands, use my feet. Where would you have me go? What would you have me do?
What do you have me say?
So I have felt in my own life, my healing from what I have gone through.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's interesting because people will say, oh, she's doing it for her ego. What could possibly be more ego crushing than what I've been through?
Well,
Right? So, but isn't that interesting? For instance, I'll give you an example. What sentence encapsulates the Course in Miracles more than this world is an illusion? And in return to love, there's a line, sickness is an illusion, because I'm talking about, Buddha said the world is an illusion, like you said, Maya. Einstein said time and space are illusions, albeit persistent ones. I'm talking about the Course. So those who were seeking to create this narrative to completely peripheralize my voice came up with that line in Return to Love. She says AIDS is an illusion. She told people, I know. So really, if you think about it, what could be more perfect? What could be more perfect? And then also what you said before, she's really not very smart. What could be more perfect? I can see that from some level. Marianne, if you can get through this intact, if you can get through this intact. So I know that intellectually, that my emotions aren't always caught to that place, but we're all going through exactly what we need to go through. And it's not any different in anybody's life than in anyone else's. So what that's supposed to mean. We both know the principles. It means that right now I'm supposed to be in conversation with you. That's all we're supposed to know. Right now, I don't know. What am I supposed to do? I don't know. Talk to Karen.
Well, I will tell you
Because
the
that's
line.
what's happening in this moment. Therefore, I know that this is what's supposed to, what are you going to do? I don't know. As long as this podcast is on, maybe have some dinner.
Something that has helped me a lot is a little line in the course that says, "A healed mind does not plan."
Yeah.
And I always say to my friends, my people in my group, I say, it doesn't mean you don't have a plan. Like you can talk about your plan. It just means don't make the plan by yourself. Like
Right.
I have been calling upon, like, again, I always say to people, I don't care, call it Jesus, call it the internal teacher, call it Holy Spirit, spirit, call it intuition. And what I don't get hung up on the names. But all I know, I'll never forget, Jack Canfield.
Hmm.
So Jack, I happened to be in an event one time that he was speaking at, and the woman who was putting on the event was a friend of mine. And so she's like, come sit at the table, like with me and Jack. So I was like one chair over from him. And yeah, it was really funny because like I was vegan and nobody made me any food. So Jack's like, have the potatoes off my plate. And we struck up a
Oh,
conversation. He was a sweetie.
nice
And
man.
I had told him, that I knew you, and he was like, "Oh," and like, I remember texting you while I was at the event to tell you. But he asked all of us to go around the table and introduce ourselves and tell him what we're working on, whatever. And I remember when it came to me, I just said, here's the thing. I do a lot of things. I've been a yoga teacher forever. I'm a spiritual mentor. I'm a writer. I'm a storyteller. I have a podcast, all these things. And I said, but all I know is every day I wake up in the morning and I say a few prayers. And one of them has always been, please have me go where you would have me go. I go, because here's what I know. And I go, if I'm driving the bus alone, we're fucked. I go, like, if I'm in charge, if those younger parts of myself or some ego part of me is fully in charge, we are in trouble. And I'll never forget, like, Jack just took a bite, put his fork down. He finished chewing. He looked at me and he's like, you need to write a book about that. And I said, what?
Oh,
He's like, you need to write a book and title it, If I'm Driving the Bus Alone, We're Fucked, or something like that. And I thought it was like such a fascinating moment. And later he and I had a whole conversation about swearing, and it was really interesting. But I'll never forget him saying that. And I think,
wait a minute.
go ahead.
In the realm of book publishing,
Yes.
that's like a big deal that Jack Canfield
I
said
know.
that to you.
I know.
Let's get into the world here for a minute. Did you write that book?
No, I haven't.
No,
I've
no,
been
no. You don't get publishing advice from Jack Canfield and then not do it, Karen.
I know. It's like it's in there somewhere, but I'm trying to get this memoir done. I'm trying to get this memoir done. And it's a love letter to my mother, amongst other things, but it's also my spiritual journey. And that's why I say, oh, there's a chapter on you in there. There's a chapter on all these things. And it's interesting because the working title, which I think will be the title of my book, it's literally, and it's a play on multiple facets. And you used this word earlier, but I'm calling it evidence. And it's about obviously evidence of a crime scene,
Mm.
but evidence of God's love. Like there's a lot of plays on this, evidence that I always belonged, whatever it is. And so I do, though, trust me, I have like a file where I'm like, books, book titles, books to write, personal
Well,
essays, whatever,
if
and it's on there.
if you had told me that day, I would have gone into this big thing about in the universe. If you're sitting next to Jack Canfield and he says, write a book. I also want to mention a quote from the Course in line with what you were saying. Beware the danger of self-initiated plans.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's really the issue here. God's plan will work, yours won't. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know where your skills and expertise fits into the larger picture. So you don't have any serious uh, rock on which to stand when you were planning what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen.
It's true. I think
And
we're an impatient bunch, though, aren't we? I
there's a
think
yeah, absolute well, and there's a line in the Course, only infinite patience
patience.
produces immediate results.
And there's another line that says something about how I'm gonna butcher it, but the essence of it is basically like only those who know or those who have faith can be patient, can wait patiently, knowing
Yes,
that
yes,
like
there is
all
some
right.
line. I don't know the exact line, but yes,
Yes.
can afford to be. That's
Yes.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think that that's really God's answer to what the question that we're talking about right now.
But
Something is, and you feel it even in terms of this moment, something is activating.
yes.
Sometimes people will say to me, I've heard it a lot in the last 2 weeks, why aren't people in the streets? That doesn't mean people don't care. It's not the zeitgeist of the moment. First of all, the forces that be don't care about people in the streets anymore. I mean, Black Lives Matter was the biggest protest movement in American history, and they were like, yeah. So it's different. Something's happening inside. Martin Luther King said, "Do not mistake our material passivity for weakness. We are spiritually active."
Oof.
So you might look at people and go, nobody's doing anything. People are thinking.
Ugh.
People are processing. When you go through something terrible, you don't immediately rush out and act necessarily, unless it's like the house is on fire. It's like you go, wait, I got to think about this. I got to think about this. And that's where I think we are. So nobody can know, you do the work in the vertical and then you get direction on the horizontal. And just be very alert to every circumstance and every connection. Be very alert. I've always felt that or since I've known to even think about these things, that one of my own character defects is I get there late, whether it was a relationship or a city I lived in. It's only later that I realized I could have been so much more present.
Mm.
I could have been so much more present. I could have brought so much more of myself to it. And if I had, I would have gotten so much more from it. And I think now it's just very important we be very present that whatever the relationship is that you're in, and I mean every relationship, every circumstance, we tend to say with our ego minds, this circumstance matters. Those don't matter. This relationship matters. Others don't matter. If you feel, as Mary Morrissey always says, there is no spot where God is not. Every single moment, every single encounter, every single relationship, if you really make your prayer, I want to inhabit this space at the highest way. Sometimes I'll say to myself, I want to be the Marianne. I want to be the version of Marianne who could handle this really well, right? Which sometimes is easier to do than others. And to really be present, that's where the future is born. So I think if we will really inhabit the space of this moment as beautifully and with as much availability and receptivity to what's possible for us and others, then incredible things are going to happen. Even with what's happening in the United States, this story is far from over. And they say in AA, every problem comes bearing its own solution. We're going to grow up now. As Lincoln said, as our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we will save our country. Can you believe he said we must disenthrall ourselves?
I think that, you know, here in the illusion, because we do have we have the belief of that we've successfully separated, and we do quote unquote have bodies and nervous systems, and the amygdala is firing these chemicals. And I think for a lot of people, we have a lot of trauma and a lot of traumatized and very young people all across the board, right? I think in this day, like who hasn't been traumatized? But I feel like a lot of people hijacked by their fear centers, right? And they don't always know the tools that are
Absolutely.
they don't know all the tools that are available to them. I've been really, I about 3 years ago, whatever, I was certified to become a hypnotist. And I don't necessarily super identify like, oh, I'm a hypnotist, but so much of what I've been learning more and more about neuroscience and the brain and the nervous system, things that just correlate with what I've learned through yoga, for the last 25, whatever years. But one of the I love how in A Course in Miracles, and every time you say it on a call, whatever, it makes me laugh. First of all, before I forget, am I the only one that finds A Course in Miracles and Jesus wicked funny? I think there are so many times when I'm reading the course and I just start laughing at some of the things that he says to us about like our foolishness and like it's almost like, yeah, you can keep doing that or you could like whatever. I laugh all the time. But because
I I I have never felt, oh, he's funny, but I have felt he's so cool.
right. That's what I always say. He's like our cool older brother with
Like,
like the good hair.
yeah, like this combination of brilliant and yeah, those moments when this could not be just a regular human being who wrote this.
Yeah, I mean, when I say funny, I don't mean like
Yeah.
ridiculous, but it's more like he's so honest and direct about laying out to us a situation that we somehow are not seeing ourselves, and it just strikes me as so funny and interesting. But anyways, my point is that a lot of people don't, when you use the words a part of our problem solving repertoire, right? I don't think a lot of people think of Jesus as being a part of their problem solving repertoire. So I want to say two things. So, like behind me, it's interesting. All these pictures that you can see right here, these are all like pictures of Jesus, like paintings. And there's a brilliant, he's I don't know if he's Chinese. I'm not sure what his heritage is. His name is Young Sung Kim, and he's a Christian artist, and he paints these. There's really tender and beautiful paintings of Jesus. And I always say to people, "Oh, it's my Jesus wall back there." And people are like, "Oh, you were like a Catholic kid, right?" And I said, "Yeah, but I had a really interesting thing that happened when I was about 13 years old. It was right after my mother had been killed, and um, I was a Catholic kid, so this confession, whatever. And have you ever been like, you've never gone to confession or anything like that, right? Because it's not your religion. Okay. So basically, you've seen in a church the confession booths, right? So there I am at St. Patrick's in Lawrence, Mass. Never forget it. I go in, and part of it is you have to go in, and you feel like you're in a spy movie because they're sitting on one side with a little slider and they're in the dark. And then you go in and you got to shut the curtain, and automatically you're like, oh, this has to be in secret. So I've done some bad things. This is like shameful. Like I got to go in the dock and admit these bad things that I've done. And then they slide it open. And the first thing you say is like, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been this long since I've been to confession. And then you got to tell them all the bad things you did, all the sinning you've done. And then the priest will say to you, okay, say your act of contrition. And then they basically like give you your punishment, like go up to the front of the church, say this many Hail Marys, whatever. Now, I'll never forget this. I mean, back then, there was no, again, talking about my mother, there was no therapy, there were no books, there was no hugging, there was no crying, there was no like, so I'm pretty sure I had PTSD, that I was like in shock. And I was a smart kid, but in that moment, I totally forgot my act of contrition. And I'll never forget, my sister was sitting outside on one of the pews waiting to go in after me. When I told him I could not remember my act of contrition, he started screaming at me, like yelling at me. And maybe he wasn't screaming, but he yelled. I was embarrassed. I was humiliated. And all I kept thinking was, I know my sister can hear this, and I know she's loving every second of this, and I'm being embarrassed. And there were other people in the church, the old ladies who had come to pray before mass and stuff. And I was just so humiliated. And he's like, go up to the front, say this many Hail Marys, this many Our Fathers, blah, blah, blah. And I shut the thing, I slid open the curtain, and there was my sister with this shit-eating grin on her face. And I just felt like I got angry. I got really angry. And I remember marching up to the front of the church, and I plunked down on the pew, and the altar's in front of me. And there's like jumbo Jesus. The Catholics love to make Jesus' suffering so huge. He's like jumbo Jesus hanging. And I look over, and I saw a statue of Mary holding baby Jesus. And I was like just so grateful in that moment to have the memory of a compassionate mother. And I remember looking up at Jesus. I remember looking around at all the stained glass windows. And I said to Jesus and I said to God, this is what I said. And I think this is what made you possible also in my life. I said, look, from now on, I literally said this. I'll never forget. I go, look, from now on, if you got something to say to me and I got something to say to you, we're going to say it to each other. Like
I'm not going to go through that guy.
no more of this middleman stuff.
Good for you.
And so I
Oh.
think that's why as a spiritual mentor, I say I'm a spiritual mutt, but I've always said, I'm like, look, Jesus is a free agent. Like Jesus is too cool for just one group of people to claim him. And
Well,
like,
that's of course
die.
what this book is about too. It's
Yeah.
no
So
religion can monopolize.
will you speak about that a little bit?
Well, it's everything that you just said, that no group, no institution can own the stars, can own the wind, can own the breeze, can own the sunlight. And Jesus is that as the name of our shared identity at one with God. No institution, no religion, regardless what it claims, can claim an ownership of that or monopolize it. And that, I believe, is the tremendous spiritual awakening that's going on around him now. When I wrote this book, it was because my editor had called to say, we keep getting calls from booksellers who say that people are coming in and saying, I want a book about Jesus, but I don't want a Christian book. Do you have any books that talk about Jesus, but not Christian specifically? And they said, don't you talk about Jesus? I said, yes, of course I do. As a student of A Course in Miracles, I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
Tell me about your sister now. Did she grow up and move in a similar kind of direction to you? Did she psychically survive all that intact as
Um, my sister went in a really different direction than me. I mean, she had her first baby at 18. She has two sons. So she became a mother at 18. Like my mother became a mother at 20. My sister became a mother at 18. And she was married for a period of time. She's not married anymore. But no, she's I'm like the weirdo in the family, right? Like I'm the spiritual vegan yoga, roll your eyes at.
right,
I'm like you talking
right.
about like on a larger scale, kind of being the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, well,
I'm
in my
kind of like,
family, I was that. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
So I have followed in your footsteps in that way. So I'm often the, auntie, whatever, and it's I've just kind of realized that my sweetie once said to me, like, did the stork drop you off at the wrong house? Like, what happened here? And I laugh and I said, well, if I listened to A Course in Miracles, the stork dropped me off at exactly the right house and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be for whatever reason. I don't always understand it, but I trust that there's something smarter than me. And you talk about GPS, a lot, and I always say, like, you know what GPS stands for? I say to my friends, God's pretty smart. So
Oh.
I trust that, I'm where I'm supposed to be. If you had told me as a kid growing up in Lawrence, Massachusetts, that I was going to move to Los Angeles, meet you, go to Egypt, go to England and Ireland, become a 35 years, whatever, student of A Course in Miracles, become a spiritual mentor and a yoga teacher. I would have laughed. I mean, there was just no, I am the most like, as for somebody who has had a lot of fear in my life, I think this is one of the reasons why A Course in Miracles has spoke so deeply to me. I don't know if you saw a few moments ago when you said, Jesus literally basically became like he had no fear. And my hands went to my hat because I'm like, I can't, like, oh, it's going to make me cry. To be able to move through the world with no fear, like uh, the longing that I have for that within myself. And A Course in Miracles, first of all, I think it's really misunderstood. A lot like you, I think it gets misrepresented in a lot of ways. But A Course in Miracles does something to my nervous system. The lesson the other day that said, God goes with me wherever I go, I was just like, no matter how many times I've heard it, read it, something, my vagus nerve, like everything just goes into parasympathetic and goes like, oh, like I don't have to figure this all out on my own. Like, oh, I don't have to know the answer to everything. Like, I can be in the mystery. Like, I don't have to have all the solutions and fix things. Like, my job is to just listen for the voice for God. And you actually, I have this marked because I want to read this little section. This is the section, this is in the book, The Small Still Voice Within. And I love this so much. This is what you said. Is it weird when people read your words back to you?
It's interesting. You'll have that experience soon.
You said listening to the voice for God is a habit we cultivate, the mental musculature of grace. Who among us hasn't decided something we came later to regret, remembering that at the time we had a gut feeling it just wasn't right? But we'd gone with some worldly voice that said differently, allowing it to override our internal knowing.
Mhm.
Walking through life taking seriously the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the mystic Jesus, the voice for God, we know that the voices of the world should always be listened to, but they should never, ever have the final say.
You
And
know, Karen, getting older, that's a large part of what the chapter 3 of life is, looking back. And there's a lot of self-forgiveness that is involved in looking at situations where if I'd only paused, if I'd only prayed about it, if I'd only prayed before I walked in the room, like you said, prepare my nervous system, if I'd only said, could I have a weekend to think about it? If, and you realize life would have gone that way and instead of went that way. But then I have to remind myself, God, your body might be older, but the universe doesn't age. So that is as true now as it ever was. Be there now. Be that more considered person now. Because we listen to some other voice. I've made some big mistakes in my life,
mm,
because I listened to some other voice. We all do that. That's
of
how you
course.
learn to start, I'm going to think first and I'm going to pray about this and thank you though. I'll get back to you. You don't even, might not even be someone around whom it is appropriate to say, I'm going to pray about it. They wouldn't, but you could say, I'm going to think about that. Thank you. But the most powerful people don't apologize for wanting to take the time before they respond.
It's so true. I think that sometimes there's a fear of like, well, if I don't respond quickly, I'm going to miss the opportunity. Or if I don't, if I don't do something, right away, somebody else might, whatever. And
Is it that? I know for myself, it's not okay to not know. That's a sign of weakness.
oh,
As opposed to, it's like in the Rilke, in that wonderful Letters to a Young Poet, he says, when you don't have the answer, live the question. And like I said, if you really look at the most powerful people, they're not in a rush to come up with an answer, and they don't apologize for that.
let me get back to you.
Let me get back to you. I remember, even on a business level, I remember someone, I don't know, an agent, a lawyer, or someone who said to me, really good advice about business meetings. It was with editors or publishers or something. He said, Marianne, just beware, you don't have to say anything.
Ha,
I love that song, Billy Joel, Leave a Tender Moment Alone. So even in personal, intimate relationships, women are afraid sometimes. But that's sometimes our silence is very magnetic.
it's true.
Mhm.
So I want to, because we just mentioned prayer, and this is a two-part thing, but I want to tell a little story first, and then and then I'll ask you, I have two questions. So you may or may not remember this, but when we were in Montecito, when I was living with you and I was around a lot, you and I we had a fight. We had, yeah. No, no,
What
no.
was it about?
I honestly don't know. It could have
Might
been
have been.
where I was putting the mail on your desk, what I didn't do. I don't know what it was. I don't remember. I remember that office. I remember that house. So it's like burned into my mind. I remember where your bed was, your changing room, where the dresses were. Like I just remember Daniel in the kitchen, blueberry. Like I remember all of it, right? So it's like burned in there. But I'll never forget coming through the front door, and you would come in the door. I think the stairs would go right upstairs, and your office was like to the right. And then there was a door from your office into the living room that went out back where you had the roses. Remember, you used to cut roses all the time?
Somebody, the person who had lived there before me, it was two gay men, and one died of AIDS. And the
Oh,
man who sold me the house said that that rose garden had been for his lover. I've never seen anything like it. Every single day, the roses, the colors, you couldn't keep up with it. I've never seen a rose garden like that. The house could be filled with roses every single day. It
I,
was the most beautiful garden. I assume it's still there.
I hope it's still there. I just remember it. I remember the
The
driveway.
colors and
There were
yeah.
so many. And I remember actually there was a vase of roses. We're taking a little detour, listeners, indulge us. I'll never forget one of the rooms was like a little room. It was almost like a little library, and there was a TV in there. And I will never forget standing, we both stood up. The TV was on. We were together when we found out that Princess Diana had died. And I will never forget that. And you turned to me because you knew, like they were showing on the TV screen, her two young sons. And you turned to me and you said something to me about it because you knew it would impact me as a young person who had lost a mother. And I think you said something like, those boys will never be the same again. And I just remember I remember standing there crying, like watching the news about it. But all this to say, I have so many memories. Like, I just have so many memories. So
So
I
you and
remember,
I were having a fight.
yeah, so we were having a fight. We were in your office and you were at your desk and you were saying something to me and you're like, "Well, I think this." And I was a little mouthy, a little masshole.
You think
And
that?
I said, "Well, I think this." And you're like, "Da da 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 da." And I was like, "Well, da 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 da." And then you're like, and I have often said this, like talk about problem solving repertoire. You said to me, "Darling, will you pray with me?" And I remember being so annoyed with you. I was like, we're in the middle of a fight. You want to pray. Like, you want to pray right now. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, yes. And we went, and I remember the coffee table, there was a chair and a couch, and you sat in the chair, and I sat in the couch, and we sat knee to knee, and we held hands. And at first, I was like really, really annoyed. Nobody had ever in my entire life used prayer as a problem solving solution. And you prayed, and I prayed, and I listened. And I remember getting a little annoyed because I started to feel better, and I wanted to stay mad.
And so it
And
worked, huh? We prayed
yeah,
for a miracle.
we prayed for a miracle. And it was like, let's put Holy Spirit in charge. Let's put Jesus in charge. Please, I could choose peace instead of this. Please help me to see this differently. Help me to see her differently, whatever. It was the first time in my life that in real time, because I think it's really easy. I think we're really, as a culture, going back to people wanting a book about Jesus, but not a religious book, that we have a suspicion now about our leaders, our spiritual leaders, whatever, right? But to see somebody who like wrote these books, like actually put it into action, I was like, I just remember being really fascinated by the whole thing. I remember feeling better. And this leads to you may not, you probably don't remember this. You have like, a lot of things, but that was really impactful and powerful. And it has made prayer a part of my problem solving repertoire ever since. And of course, also A Course in Miracles. But I think you are one of the best prayers I have ever met. I do. I think people talk about, oh, Helen Schuckman channeled A Course in Miracles. I'm like, you want to see somebody channel? Go see Marianne Williamson give. I mean, I'm not, of course, Helen, amazing, right? The scribe. But something happens when sometimes you open your mouth, and I just feel like it is a beam of light that just shoots into you and go boom, like comes out. So here's my thing. I meet so many people. They were taught prayers to memorize, to regurgitate, but they haven't actually been taught how to pray. So if I could ask you, if somebody came to you and you're like, I don't even know where to begin. Like, how do I start a relationship with prayer? And then I have one final question for you. What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, nobody's up there going, well, you better get the words right. And words are at best but symbols. And it says somewhere in the Bible, doesn't it? Something about pray as would a little child. There is some line in the New Testament.
Maybe pray like.
As would a little child, something like that, some line in the Bible. Remember, I'm Jewish. And think about the first scene in Fiddler on the Roof, where Tevye is up. You've seen that, right? And he's up on, and he's
Yeah.
talking to God. That's Jews. We just talk to God. What? That's kind of, I think that's,
That's
I
how I
was,
pray a lot of times
I mean,
too.
we have the Hebrew prayers and so forth, don't get me wrong, but just the whole relationship of God is very present. Like
Yes.
what? What's going on now? So I think that's been just flowing forth from that kind of intimacy. I love that your friend said the miracle does not come from information, but from intimacy, meaning it comes from that moment of connection. And I was brought up in a house where God seemed that it just is.
I pray, I always say, I talk to God as if he's my best friend.
He is.
And that's what I say. That's what I say. I'm like, God's my best friend. And they'll say, like, how do you identify? Because I think we're all, in this realm, we're really encouraged to have titles and it's like, oh, I'm a mom or I'm a hypnotist or a writer or whatever. And I say, first and foremost, and it's so helpful for me to remember this. First and foremost, I am a child of God. Like that, if I can remember that, and I'll never forget this concept. I make these little drawings. I might have one here. I make these little drawings sometimes when I listen to you talk. Like the other day, you said God is that ocean, the perfect oneness of love, and I draw these little things while you talk sometimes. You'll see. Here's another one. You were talking about like letting God's love come into your mind and then down into your heart, and so like I draw these things. So I drew this drawing one time. I don't know if it was you. It was something I had read in the course. I'm a kind of a visual person as much as being a writer. I kind of think cinematically. It's probably those screenwriting classes I took in LA. But anyways, I was thinking about how um, we are taught. I drew this body, right? I drew this body, a little stick figure, and I said, as a Catholic kid, I was taught that God is something out here, and that I have to behave a particular way to earn that love. Then I started to learn a little bit more. And then you start to hear, like, oh, well, God is within you. And I was like, okay, so like God's in me. And I drew a little stick figure. And now the heart went from being out there like the sun to now being in here, a little red heart. And then, of course, the miracles just blew my mind because I'm in God. And I was like, there's no place. This is why God's with me wherever I go, because I'm in God. Like, I just think, like, come on, come on. And it's such, right? Is it just me who gets blown away by this stuff?
No, I never cease being blown away. And I'm just thinking about the line in the course. What is it? A source, something cannot leave its source.
An
What is the
idea
line?
cannot leave his
An
source.
idea cannot leave its source. You are an idea in the mind of God. And the Course in Miracles says, if you have a hard time with that, if you can't, it doesn't work for you that God's an idea. That's because it's not working for you. You're an idea.
Well, we don't like the idea of being an idea, Marianne.
Until you really allow it in. And
Yes.
how cool is that? And an idea cannot leave its source, which is you can't be disconnected from God. But it's also why you can't project your anger onto someone else and not be at the effect of it.
That's right.
And if I give you love, it's more love to me. But anything, so when you really take that in practical psychological terms, an idea doesn't leave its source. We try to project it onto other people, your guilt or whatever, but you will only feel either more guilty or more angry.
Yeah, I mean, you talk a lot about, and you mentioned that in this book as well. You said how Jesus, the mystic Jesus, is an aspect of consciousness alive in each of us. He's not an abstraction, but he's a lived experience. And I think that one of the things that I wish more people understood, like about A Course in Miracles, about Jesus, about these concepts, is that like I always say, like, A Course in Miracles isn't just a book. Yes, it is a teaching tool. But like when you talk about it as like spiritual psychotherapy, to me it's like a set of instructions. Like if you don't want to suffer that much, read this and then like take the next step and do some of these things, right? But people will like, when a dog hears a funny sound and they tilt their head, you
Yeah,
say to
yeah,
people it's spiritual psychotherapy and they go like, could you
yeah.
just maybe explain that a little? I'm always trying to help. Like you're going to come to a Course in Miracles. You've often said, and I believe this too, you don't find a Course in Miracles, it kind of finds you. And that's exactly what happened to me. It's what happened to you when you saw the book on the table, right? But I try to think about like, and you have done this your whole career, making a Course in Miracles maybe a little more user friendly, if that's a safe way to say that. But so
Well,
can you,
yeah. So the Course in Miracles says religion and psychotherapy at their peak are the same thing. Once you know this is all happening in the mind of God, then you realize that to heal your mind is the deepest religious experience because that is what salvation is. The only thing to be saved from is your own fear-based thinking. That's why Gandhi said the problem of the world is that humanity is not in its right mind. The Course says in quite a few places, this course is practical. This course is not a religion. This course is practical. So yes, my career, and I think yours and all of ours who try to coach, is to help people take these abstract ideas and make them practical in their lives. Because that's where the rubber meets the road. The rubber meets the road in that moment when you and I had the argument. I was thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if you and I, if there was a way to go back to that moment? Like neither one of us remember what it was about, but wouldn't it be amazing if we could now, at this point in our lives, if there was almost like a telescope or something, and we could go back to that moment and see who we were, what we were going through?
you know,
You know, you were talking before about Diana's death.
mm-hmm,
The night before she died, we were in that house.
mm-hmm.
I was about to go to bed. I walked over to my bed. I sat down, and I think I was putting on some hand cream or something before I turned off the light. And I heard a voice in my, it wasn't a voice because I've always had that experience where you actually hear a voice, but I heard an internal voice and
Yes,
it was very clear. And this is what it said. Did I tell you this at the time?
I don't think so.
You may or may not ever meet Prince Charles, but you will never meet Princess Diana.
Come on.
You may or may not ever meet Prince Charles, but you will never meet Princess
Oh
Diana.
my God.
And then I remember, and I think this was true of many people, I cried so much. And I was thinking, I'm an American. I mean, it's tragic, it's horrible. I'm so sorry. But this unbelievable grief that people all over the world felt, there was something that I remember that line in Love Actually.
Mm-hmm.
Was an Emma Thompson line where they said something like, "Oh, I thought the English were unemotional or something." She said, "Oh, that was before Diana died. Now none of us can stop crying." I mean, that line in a Carly Simon song that she said she got from a Scott Peck book. There's more, and I think this so much relates to you. There's more love in a broken heart.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
That it cracks you open.
There's so many there's so many like I sometimes just wish I could put my brain in your brain or do a mind meld thing so you can you could go back and
I
look
think
through
we do. I
all the
think you and
files.
I
Yeah, all the
You and
files.
I do. I mean, I remember, like I was mentioning to you before about when we were in a Zoom class just yesterday or the day before, and I could tell. I mean, if you think about it, if we're all one and there's no place where one of
Mhm.
us stops and the other starts, we are in mind meld.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, and I just think, we might notice, different things. And I think like being a young woman in your sphere, like, um, you've taught me like so many lessons. There was another time. I sometimes I'm like hesitant. I'm like, I don't know if I should tell these stories, but I'll never forget being on I'm trying to think. We were in Egypt, I think. And because it was before I started working with you. But we were in Egypt, and there was a man, there was somebody that you had, I don't know if you had recently broken up or whatever. No, 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 no. It was England and Ireland. That's right, because you were setting me up with somebody. Do you remember that whole thing? You don't?
No.
With Bobby?
Oh, he recently had a baby.
I know.
Isn't that
It
wonderful?
is. He's like
So
60
wonderful.
and a dad.
Yeah, it's so
He's so
beautiful the way
happy.
he's kept in touch over the years.
Yes.
So y'all would have really bonded over,
His loss and mine. Well, that's why you set us up, because of his loss and my loss, and we thought
wow,
we would connect. So, but
wow.
but it was the ending of that relationship that you then gave me as a gift. You gave me a session with Daphne, and that's how I met Daphne.
Oh, I didn't remember any of that.
Oh my God. So, but here's my point. I remember being in England and Ireland, and we were on the bus. Because we would go to these sacred sites, right?
Mhm.
These spiritual tours, and we go to these sacred sites, and we were like, the Chalice Well, or wherever we were. We went to we saw such incredible things. But at one point, I flippantly made a comment, and because you had like set me up with him, and I was like calling him at like odd hours
Was
because
it
we were,
Bobby? You mean I
yeah,
set you up with Bobby?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you had set me, and he and I were gonna meet up after I got back from this trip. And I made some sort of comment to you like, oh, well, now I have a boyfriend or something like that. Now we just need to get you one or something. I don't remember exactly what I said. And you whipped around like so fast. And I remember like I'm like, I haven't been scolded like in a long time. I was like, and you said something to me about, and it wasn't so much a personal statement about you, like don't tell me, but it was more about women in general, and how we didn't need a man to complete us, and that there was nothing lacking, and like da 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 da, right? And these were all things that maybe my mother would have taught me, or maybe somebody would have said to me at some point. But I was like literally thrown into the deep end of the pool as a child, and I was highly unsupervised. I was dog paddling most of my life, just trying to like keep my. So all these like I had a teacher, spiritual, my one of my spiritual teachers who once said to me, there's bhakti. And bhakti is like devotional love, and it's so feminine. It's so like, yes. And she's like, there's bhakti. She goes, and then there's shakti. And you shaktied me. And I was like, oh my God. But here's the thing. I needed to hear that. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I remember just thinking, like, there are so many lessons along the way of me becoming a woman and me becoming the person that I am, that I say this to you often. Like, I would not be who I am if I had not met you. And
Well,
it did.
that's not true because if you had not met me, you would have met someone else.
Okay,
Whatever, but thank you. That was not to not receive the acknowledgement, and I
yes.
appreciate your saying that. And we both know.
But you had a particular way of speaking to me that many other people in my life did not. It just kind of cut through, like,
Mhm.
because also I listened, because I respected you, and I cared what you thought. I cared what you thought. And so I was like, oh, and I've never forgotten. Like I can tell you, I have so many of these moments, and I'll just always be grateful that God decided, like, whoever's supposed to meet shall meet, and how wonderful that I got to meet you in this
You
lifetime.
know, we started this conversation early on in the conversation. We were talking a little bit about my political journey. I was going to say my political travails because
That
um,
too.
I would say to you something similar when we were in circles. I remember being one place, I think it was some labor, I can't remember. But the way you spoke about me uh, at those political
Mm.
events in New Hampshire, and please know that I feel as grateful to you. And that was such a, particularly given everything I've talked about and how few people would testify on my behalf. So Thank you in return. You know, I remember Sandy Scott, I think, once said to me, every relationship is a gift exchange.
Mm,
Every relationship is a teaching and a learning. And also remember, what was is as true now as it was. Life is not just what happened. Remember back then, you know? I
yeah.
mean, this period of our lives, this is it. What's going on today in this country and what's going on in this world. So, thank you so much for everything.
And thank you. And I receive it. And I'm so grateful. My final question that I didn't, that I was going to ask you and play off of a
Mhm.
moment ago. Um, Given where we are right now, and I know so many people who feel, just as you've been saying too, who feel completely overwhelmed. I think that's part of the design right now. I think they want people to feel a little overwhelmed. It feels a little
Yeah,
chaotic. It feels a little like a lot of fear. It's just a lot of fear right now. I also think it's designed for people to feel exhausted, to feel a little helpless and hopeless. I think it's part of the whatever the plan is, it's part of the plan. And so,
there's a reason for that. So, I want to talk to that in a
oh
moment, but go
please,
on.
no, go ahead. No, I can just stop right there, and I want you to speak to that.
Well, that's part of the autocrat's playbook. Because if they can create enough chaos, you want calm so much. You want relief from the agita of the chaos. So you are more vulnerable to somebody who says, just let me handle everything.
Mm.
Just let me handle everything. I'll decide which agencies and I'll just let me handle everything, which is the opposite of a democracy where we decide on everything. So creating all that chaos is, like you said, part of the plan.
So we need. I remember you saying one time you were speaking at Harvard Divinity School, and somebody was trying to convince you to do something, and they raised their hand and they stood up and they said, "Will you run for this, or will you do this particular thing?" And I remember you saying, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, the age of the soloist is over. It is
Mhm,
now time for the choir.
mhm.
And I think that we forget that by the people, for the people, like that we have so much power. Oh, and I think your book is so timely. I love that you have a whole chapter on prayer. Like I said, I've been reading it and marking it like I do with all your books. But um, before I ask my final question, is there anything that I didn't bring up or ask that you wish I had?
Mm-mm. No, it all seems perfect.
Okay. So, you being one of the best prayers that I know, do you feel comfortable maybe ending this with a
Sure,
prayer for my
sure,
listeners and us?
sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Dear God, Karen and I give thanks. We give thanks for all that was and all that is. We place in your hands our past that you might change our mind about it for us, that we might know that only the love given us was real, the love that we gave was real. All else now falls away. Knowing that her mother is as present right now as she has ever been. We surrender our relationship as we have always done and ask that it be used for your purposes. In this present moment, we pray to feel your love within us, between us, and extending through us to all the world. And dwelling in that space of radiance, may we become ever more the women you would have us be, ever more the channels you would have us be for the love that is who we are. We give to you our past, our present, our future. We give to you our country. We give to you our world. Show us how we might best serve. Make us who you would have us be, that we might do as you would have us do, and know the peace thereof. We bow before the Spirit in one another and to you. And so it is. Together we say,
Amen.
Amen.
Oh, you make me cry every time. I appreciate you so much.
I love you, Karen. I appreciate you so much.
And
And nothing's over. We're mid-journey.
I know. And I do I pray that somehow, some way that, quote unquote, there is a power obviously greater than that, but in here in the illusion, the dream, the powers that be, I just pray that somebody gives you the opportunity to be heard, because I think that what you are trying to share and explain about the greater forces and what's possible when love is the bottom line. I think this is how it's part of the solution. And I don't know how it's going to happen. And like I said, on the very first day that I met you, in a book form, is that we need a miracle. And I know we all have a role to play in it, but I think you do too, and a big one. And I just hope that you get an opportunity. You're still in DC, yes? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad you're close by, and that I don't think, same thing. I don't think we've heard, obviously, the spirit. I don't even worry about. I think like books, speaking, that will continue. But I think there's something else afoot. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm not counting you out yet, Marianne Williamson.
I love you. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. I love you, Karen. Thank you.
So all of you listeners, I have listed all the ways you can get in touch, or find out about Marianne's work. She has obviously all of her books, starting with A Return to Love, all the way to the Mystic Jesus, The Mind of Love, and there's 14 others sandwiched in there as well. She has an incredible Substack. For those of you who are more curious about A Course in Miracles from this conversation, Marianne also offers each day. She reads one of the lessons from A Course in Miracles and then does a teaching on it, right? On the principles and what we've just read. And then she just this year started doing the text. Marianne, I can't tell you how many people were so happy that you're reading the text, because for so many people, it feels like a foreign language. They're like, what is happening? I tell the story of when I first started doing A Course in Miracles because of you. I jokingly say that you're the gateway drug to A Course in Miracles.
That's great. I love that. I
But
love that.
it took me 2 years to just get through it. I would literally, in fact, I have my very first version. It's a hardback and it's missing the spine because of how many times I threw it in frustration because I couldn't understand it. I wasn't ready yet. Oh my God. But you guys, so Marianne does that. She also has a monthly membership where you do like an hour and a half once a month. You can ask any questions about A Course in Miracles, and those calls have been fantastic. There's just 1,000 ways to learn from her, to hear her speak, whatever. So please do that. And I always end my conversations with people, and I end my podcast by always saying the same thing, which is this: wherever you go, may you leave the people, the animals, the planet, yourself, the environment better than how you found it. Wherever you go, may you, your energy, your presence, and your love be a blessing. Thank you.
I love you. I
I
love
love
you so much, Karen. And
I love
it's
you
an
too.
honor to know you. Thank you.